Hello, hello, everyone. This is Dr. B from Steps to the Future, coming to you this week with another C3: career awareness, career development, and career exploration. Again, if you join in, please make sure you put some comments in the comment section because we want folks to join in the conversation. Now, if this is your first time here, it's important for you to know that your conversation, your comments are certainly welcome. But I also want you to know about these three words that I have under my name. So you see three words there: grace, play, and community. Um, Following the lead of one of my colleagues, Jim Peacock, I no longer make New Year's resolutions. What he does and what I have started modeling after him is picking three words of intention for 2023. So my three words for this year are grace, play, and community. So I'm giving myself more grace, I'm playing more, and I'm expanding my communities. So those are my three words for 2023. For those of you out there that are interested in college counseling for your youngster, for your high school person, juniors and seniors, please reach out to me at drb@stepstothefuture.com and let me know if you're interested. If you would like to schedule an initial consultation, you can do that here at stepstothefuture.com/appointment. Please make sure you pick the one that says initial consultation, and that will get us started. And I would love for you to subscribe to my newsletter. I know a lot of stuff here, a lot of commercial stuff, but I want to get this all done at the beginning. My monthly newsletter, it's here, bit.ly/steps140, and that will get you on the list. This evening, I have with me a guest that I have admired for quite a long time. And I'm really thrilled that you will have the opportunity to meet her, to talk with her, to exchange words of wisdom with her. And when we come back, I will read her bio and introduce you to Dr. Sekile Nzinga. Okay, and we are back. That was quick, wasn't it, folks? So let me introduce you to Dr. Sekile. Sekile M. Nzinga was appointed as the inaugural Chief Equity Officer and Deputy Chief of Staff for Equity for Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker in 2021. She is the former Women's Center Director and Interim Chief Diversity Officer at Northwestern University. Prior to working as a senior administrator in state government and higher education, Dr. Nzinga was a professor of social work and women and gender studies for 18 years. She is the author of Lean Semesters: How the University Reproduces Inequity, and the editor of Laboring Positions, Black Women Mothering, and the Academy. And you can see both of those books back here, and I will definitely hold them up to the screen as we go on. Sekile's community engaged work has focused on reproductive justice, gender justice, and educational justice. In her spare time, she loves thrifting, shopping for earrings, collecting beach glass, and baking for family and friends. Dr. Nzinga, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Dr. B. I'm so excited.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So you're off in another part of the country visiting family, so you're always the person that's reaching out to family members and doing 50 million things. I'm always so impressed with how you make it seem easy. I know it's not easy, but you always have this way of just pulling everything together and making it look just wonderful. So I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah, thank you. I used to feel like I was disjointed. I was engaged in social work, and I was doing feminist work, and I was, also doing other community-based work, and I sometimes felt my career was disjointed. And it wasn't until I was actually in an interview, an interview for the Women's Center, when I said it wasn't disjointed, that all of those pieces actually made me uniquely qualified for the job. And it was when I said that in the interview that I was like, yeah, I actually believe this statement that I'm saying, that I think that each piece of my career has made me uniquely qualified for that position at the time. But it also, I think, just it is who I am. I have, I look at it more as a quilt, and I do think that there are folks that have kind of this one pathway and they just stay in their same career for 30 years, and I think that's beautiful. But I've always been interested in looking at how could I do this exact same thing in another system or in another moment, and it keeps me energized, and I don't know, it keeps me busy. It keeps me, I think, in that lifelong learner space. So while I say I'm uniquely qualified, I think it also when I switch around in careers, it presents a unique challenge for me too that I love.
That is so true. So, with all that being said, tell us a little bit about your college journey, how you got started. Because one of the things I love for my students to know, um, they see the end product, they hear your bio, and they're like, oh wow, she's doing all of this. That's a lot. How could I ever get there? But everybody starts somewhere. And I'd love for you to tell them
Yeah.
about your start.
Yeah. So I like to always let folks know I'm, who I am now, or what I've been able to accomplish has been, I always want to actually give a shout out to well-funded public education and well-funded public health care, because to be honest, I was a Head Start kid. I was a K through 12 public school kid. I had free lunch. I had free breakfast. My healthcare was sliding scale and accessible. I lived in public housing, and so when you think about why we have public institutions, it's to help people like me who grew up in poverty and working class background. But because I had these stable systems in place that helped me to stabilize, so having food at school, having access to healthcare, at a public clinic, having even access to free summer activities like camp, or a free access to local swimming pools to keep me busy as a kid. All those things I think contribute to our well-being and our development, and they're often not talked about. But I name those as those were stabilizing forces in my life, and they helped me to I think launch. Quite honestly, of course, I had some extended family who were loving, and but I had and other adults in my life like guidance counselors and teachers. But I do want to name the structures and systems that were in place that have been really defunded a lot over the last 40 and 50 years. The money that we used to put in public systems, as we don't put there in the same way. It's been privatized, and so I just want to name how those. I do believe those systems helped stabilize me and provided me with a good education, stable housing, quality health care, and all those things that you need to be able to thrive.
Exactly. I am so glad you said that, because as a student who was K through 12 public schools in Providence, Rhode Island, shout out to Central High School and Gilbert Stewart Middle School and Edmund W. Flynn, which no longer exists, and the places like Buckland Pool, all those wonderful structures that were in place. And just as you were, I came from low income, from poverty, first generation, single mom. And again, when you talk about that, it does make me remind me of all those structures that were in place that also helped me move
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, and it's important because I think we spend a lot of time about you got to have good parents and it starts at home. And I don't want to minimize that. Of course, we need love and safety at home, but not everybody gets love and safety at home. And so when you have systems that can kind of step into the gap, and you have that actually can help stabilize children's lives. And so when you have caring systems and supporting and activities that keep you out of trouble, and keep you, and I shouldn't say keep out of trouble, but keep you engaged even as a young person. I spent my summers walking, going, being, having a public bus to be able to go to the beach. We had public buses, so you didn't need a lot of money to go have fun in the summer as a teenager. And so those, I believe, are foundations that I want to name, that help me, be able to at least get through, and be able to then move on to college. And I went to historically Black college, which was also publicly, public college. I went to for my master's program. I also went to a state university, Ohio State University. My undergrad was Oregon State University in Baltimore. And my PhD, again, another publicly funded institution, University of Maryland. So from K through PhD, I went to school in public systems, and I share that too as a professor, because I often hear younger people feeling like they have to go to these Ivy League schools or some private school or these top tier schools, and I don't want to diminish that, but I think that we can get a quality education anywhere. I know as a professor, I didn't teach in those schools, those top schools, but I know that the places that I did teach, I cared about my students and I poured into them, and they are thriving and doing wonderful things in the world now. And so we don't necessarily need to always think we have to be in these elite institutions to be successful, or to contribute to the world. I know I actually felt very I felt very much like I knew my students because I taught at a small school, and I could see, and we stayed connected as faculty and students, and because I was engaging in smaller settings. So I just want to give a shout out to the kinds of institutions that can still be helpful to you. You don't have to always go after the elite thing. I've never had access to an elite institution until I worked for one a few years ago, and I've been fine. So.
Yes, you have been fine. I think it's so important. I am so glad that you talked about that, because as I'm working with my students, a lot of times we have to have those conversations about the types of schools that are out there, and that just because you don't know the name of that school does not mean that school is not a good match for you.
Yeah,
So again, I am thrilled that you said that, because we have those conversations on a daily basis. Um,
yeah.
and we actually have a viewer here. Thank you, Miss Lewis, has said, some excellent comments. So thank you for that. One of the things, so you found your way. So backing up a little bit, you went to a public high school
Hmm.
that in the city, it was the only public high school that required an entrance exam.
Yeah, I want to tell you that story actually.
Okay.
So interesting story. I don't know if you knew this story about me, Belinda. So I walked. I remember walking to classical high school. In I guess I was in eighth grade, and you had to take an entrance exam, and the vast majority of the students who got into that school did get into college and went off to a four-year institution. They actually, in our school newspaper, they would publish where we were all going, and so I walked over with my friends, two of my friends who were in private school, and I walked. I went to Nathaniel Green, another public middle school in Providence, and so we went over, we took the exam, and then we walked back. They didn't get in, and I did. And I didn't want to go to this all white institution, not because I wasn't smart or that I didn't want to be smart, because there's all this research about Black kids not wanting to be smart. I just did not want to be in school without my friends, and I felt scared and lonely in this kind of all white space with none of my friends from my neighborhood. So I got the letter that I got in, and I hid the letter up under my mattress.
Oh my goodness.
And I did not want to. And so my guidance counselor, my middle school guidance counselor, called my house, and they called my mother and said, Monique got into classical, but we haven't gotten your letter back that she's going. And my mother said, well, yeah, she's going. Of course she's going. And that's how I got into the, that's how I went to
Oh
class.
my goodness. No, I did not know that story. That is, the more we talk, the more I realize some of the similarities. So
Yeah.
I had back in the day when I was at Gilbert Stewart, I had taken the exam for classical.
Yeah.
and got in. Did not want to go for the same reason. I wanted to go to Central where my friends were going to be going.
Yep.
And the year
Yeah.
I was at Gilbert Stewart, it was going to be the last year for ninth grade. And I had been with those people since seventh grade. I begged my mother, I said, please don't make me go to classical. I do not want to go there. I want to go to Central. I promise you I'll do well. I'll go to college. I don't want to go to classical. And she let me stay at Gilbert Stewart, and that's how I went to Central. I
Oh
did,
my goodness.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting. It's so interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
from classical, how did you find your way to Morgan?
well, another interesting story. I had a couple of cousins who had gone to college, but they were not in the same state where we were in Rhode Island. So I didn't really have access to family who were kind of college bound. I had a aunt and a couple of cousins that I knew went to college. So I didn't really have a reference for going to college. My parents didn't go to college. It wasn't ever a discussion. But I went to classical, and like I said, everybody was talking
Right.
college junior year. Everybody was taking, and so we focus on adults being influences in our lives, but for me it was my peers, my all my peers, my black friends, because all the black friends linked up at classical. They were all studying for the SAT, ACT, and I just kind of fell into being in my peer group. I was observant, I saw what my peers were doing, and I fell in line. And I remember one of my friends, I was like, I want to go to college, but I don't know anywhere. I don't know where to go. I don't even know. I haven't even thought about it. And so, and we did go on a college tour to some HBCUs, but we went to Howard and Hampton, but I still just didn't have a sense of how to approach it. And one of my friends said, why don't you go to school? They said my dad's best friend works at Morgan State. They were like, why don't you think about Morgan, because it's kind of just a train ride away. It's only like 7. It's not, it's kind of close enough. And because I think at that point I kind of did know that I wanted to be at an HBCU, but I didn't know how to approach it. And so I applied to Morgan, and I applied to Hampton. And Hampton accepted me provisionally because I was going through a lot during my teenage years at home. And so my grades had dropped. So while I was a high tester and high achiever, my grades weren't the best. My performance, difference between ability and performance. My performance wasn't where it should be because I was navigating a lot at home. And so I got into Hampton provisionally, and they said I had to go to a summer program in order to go. And Morgan accepted me outright. So where I went. I went to Morgan because I was like, I wanted my summer, and I was just kind of like, whatever. Now again, when I got to Morgan, I actually still had to take a remedial English class, which was interesting because I test really well and perform really well in English, but at the time, I wasn't, I was navigating a lot, and so I wasn't performing well in school. And so I had to still take, and I remember being in that class, and my professor was like, why are you in my class? I was like, they put me in here. And he went to Brown, so he was sweet on me. He was always good to me. He was just like, why are you in my class? Get your life, and let's keep it moving. He went to Brown, and so he knew I was Providence, and so he just was always
Yes.
on me. But I had to. But again, I only applied to 2 schools, barely got in. Still had to take remedial exams and remedial class once I did get in, and then I thrived once I got in an environment that was nurturing, and I had professors who cared for me. I was in a safe environment, and I just all my nerdiness was allowed to thrive. I was able to perform well again, and I did really well in college.
That is so good. So tell me, so when you went to Morgan, did you do internships? What did you do outside of the
Yeah, so
classroom?
I did. I was a peer educator, so that's like someone on campus who helps receive new students when they come in, or give tours. So I was a student ambassador. yeah, so I was two things. I was a peer leader, which helped folks transition to the college experience. I was also a student ambassador who gave tours for high school students who were interested in school. I also danced in the modern dance ensemble, so that kept me really busy. And I was a work study student, so those things were the kind of things I did during the school year. We at that time, I wouldn't say it was internship focused, but because I stayed in Baltimore for my summers, I would always take a job that focused on my career. And so I knew I was going into social work. So I always did some summer job that focused on working with kids or working in the community. And then social work in your junior and your senior, it requires you to do a field placement. So you're required to do 16 hours, and in your, like, in an internship focusing in social work. So my first one, I can barely remember what it is, but my second one was actually at the Girl Scouts of Central Maryland. And so me and a friend were assigned to the Girl Scouts, and we had to create 3 unique non-traditional Girl Scouts troops in Baltimore. And so we actually created a Girl Scouts troop in the women's prison in Jessup, Maryland. We created a Girl Scout troop within a home for teenage mothers, and we created a Girl Scout group in an after school program in one of Baltimore City's middle schools. And so the Girl Scout one, the Girl Scout one in the prisons, actually is a national program right now, still running. It's called Girl Scouts Behind Bars, and we piloted that program. I didn't even know it was still going. I did my internship and went on, and then a few years ago, I saw it was on like 60 Minutes. There was a big story on Girl Scouts Behind Bars, and I was like, oh crap, that thing's still going on. But it was a joint program between the women's prison in Jessup and the Department of Justice in DC. But yeah, that's still a program still going.
I can see now, in listening to you and hearing
You're
about all of
frozen,
your.
Dr. B. I hope I'm not.
No, you're not frozen. I think we're just freezing on each other. So, okay, so we can, I don't know why this is doing this. So folks, we're having a little technical stuff here, but otherwise, I can hear you. So I don't know if you can hear
Okay,
me. Yeah, I
it's so
couldn't.
funny. You always come back when you say I hear you, then I can hear you. So that must be the buzzword.
I know. It just wants
So,
to do that to
yeah.
us. Listening to you describe your experiences as an undergrad gives me more understanding of the work that you've done as an adult. I mean, it's something that,
Mhm.
when I think of justice work, when I think of advocacy, when I think of all the, women's rights, reproduction rights, educational rights, I think of you because you have put it all together. And it's
Yeah.
really interesting. So we do have a question where Angela wants to know, how would you describe your HBCU experience? Because we're hearing so much now about HBCUs, especially in light of this recent SCOTUS decision.
Yeah. Boo SCOTUS. But so great question. I actually loved my HBCU experience. I will say that I'm a bit of a romantic because I was coming from a very destabilized moment in my life, and so coming to a place where I had friends and faculty and administrators pouring into me, and really seeing me as a promising student, and not having to navigate racism or people just not believing in me. It was affirming for me. I will say that what I've grown over the years to also recognize that not everybody had the experience I had, but I think for me, while always experienced being around Black folks. I hadn't seen, just being in Baltimore, I hadn't seen Black radio stations and Black folks, on the news, and, Black folks who elected to office. And so it was, I mean, for a while, I was so confused, even walking by my university, and I would see Black people coming out of houses. And I mean, I've seen that a few times, like in this, when I would go home for my family reunions in North Carolina, I would see that. But in Rhode Island, we didn't see a lot of Black folks like living in houses, because I lived in the project. So I guess for me, so it was just a whole, not just educational experience, but just a reorientation to like, oh, there is a such thing as a Black middle class. So there is a such thing as Black homeowners and Black folks with all these different professional roles in society that I hadn't seen. And then also seeing the diversity of Blackness. Like, I understand my Blackness as Blackness in Providence, Rhode Island, right? Urban, northern Blackness, working class Blackness. But there were middle class folks. There were folks from the Caribbean. There were folks from Africa. There were folks from California and Louisiana. And they all had different notions of what Blackness meant to them. And so that is what I think a HBCU experience also does. So it's like the educational piece, having all these Black faculty, having all these brilliant Black students on the side of you. And so it just squashes all that piece about racism, right? And then, or that you're racially deficient, right? And then also having just this diverse experience of Blackness. Like, I realized that my notion of Blackness is so small, right? It's like the Blackness is such a broad and inclusive concept. And I feel like when I'm in predominantly white spaces, particularly predominantly white institutions, they always say like Black students or Black faculty. And I'm like, who? Which students? Which Black students? Which ones? The working class ones? The middle class ones? The ones with disabilities? The ones first generation? Like, which Black students are you talking about? Because we are a diverse people. And so, yes, we're all navigating racism, but it's diversity. And so I feel like HBCU does that for you. It helps you understand the depth and the expansiveness of Blackness, which I think we need to be built up in that way as we go out into the world. So I felt built up at Morgan. You couldn't tell me I couldn't do nothing after I left Morgan. So they built me up and like affirmed, me. Yeah.
That is absolutely wonderful. I love what you talked about, the different types of Blackness, because we're not a monolith. And unfortunately, that's how folks see. Sometimes that's how we see ourselves. And that is so far from the truth. So far from the truth. I love how you
there were times.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, in the pieces where I struggled sometimes at Morgan was around class, because I was a working class person, so I didn't have as much money as my roommate. I had 3 middle class roommates, and they had cars and they had, just resources that I did not have. And so I felt often alienated in that space. But I mean, I later came into myself, but I think that, I think that is something you're going to have to navigate, and of course, gender stuff is in every place. I think like gender-based stuff. One of my favorite professors, who I never took a class with, wrote a chapter in my first book, and she was a professor at Morgan, and her daughter was one of my best friends at Morgan, and she wrote about her experience as a woman faculty member, and she faced a lot of sexism as a faculty member at Morgan, and that was hard for me to hear and read, but she wrote about it in this chapter. She passed away recently, so I really miss her. I dedicated my second book to her, Rosalind Terborg Penn, who is one of the founders of Black women's history. And she started that work at Morgan. She talks about her experience being a mom and a professor and not getting the support she needs. So the Sekile, the student, will say that HBCU experience was beautifully healing for me and affirming for me. Sekile, the professor and scholar, will say that every institution is going to have flaws, right? And going to have structural flaws, and whatever is going on in the society is going to show up in institutions. And so we don't support women, working mothers, in any job, quite honestly. So of course, it's not a surprise that Dr. Penn writes about how she didn't get supported, at Morgan when she was a faculty mother, so I want to lift that up and be honest and say, of course, all systems, all institutions are going to have, their challenges. So yeah, their areas of growth.
So we have a comment from another viewer, from Kathy Brown. And she says, what a treat to tune in. Kathy, thank you so much. I haven't talked to you in a while. I'm so proud of you ladies and your experiences of sharing, learning, and giving back. So again, Kathy, thank you for tuning in, because I'm learning new things. I love what Sekile said at the beginning about being a lifelong learner, because I think that's just something that I know it's in my DNA, and it's definitely in her DNA. So this is what we do as lifelong learners. We do give back whenever we can, in whatever fashion or platform that we have to use. So Sekile, you went from Morgan State, an HBCU, to the Ohio State University.
Yeah, yeah. So one of my biology lab partners basically was sharing with me how she was going on this trip to Ohio State, and that the Mr. Carson, who was the director of our career center at Morgan, was taking a group of students from Morgan to Ohio State. I made a beeline to Mr. Carson's office after that class, and he said, we're leaving next week. He said, this is a program that Ohio State has had for years, where they are trying to recruit the top students from HBCUs, but you have to have your application complete, because they accept your app. They need to take your application early and review your application to see if you can be admitted early, and you could possibly also receive funding. So I had less than a week to pull together my Ohio State application. Mr. Carson read my essay, and it was crap. He gave me feedback on it. And so, these are where the folks help you. We don't get here alone. And he helped with that essay. He says, got some good bones. He said, I know where you're going, but this is where it needs to go. And I went back and I wrote it again. I went out on that trip with him and with the rest of the students at Morgan. We all got into Ohio State. We all fully funded to our program. I got 100% funded for my master's program in social work. And I ended up being the student who gave the College of Social, it was actually a College of Social Work at Ohio State, because Ohio State's so big, it's not even a department or a school. We have a full college. And I gave the graduation speech. I was a student selected to give the graduation speech at Ohio State. So I had a focus on clinical social work with a concentration on mental health in the Black community. So that was pretty amazing to be selected, and that. It was a 1-year program. If you have a bachelor's degree in social work, you can become what's called an advanced standing program, advanced standing student. So you skip your first year of your master's program and you go right into the concentration year in social work, and it's pretty intense. And so I had a BSW from Morgan, went for my MSW, advanced standing at Ohio State, finished my master's in a year. So it was pretty intense.
I guess so. That is.
So I only spent about 15 months in Ohio. Yeah.
Okay. And then from there, so tell us a little bit about your career, because you started as a professor.
No, I started as a social worker. So I was getting my MSW. And so again, Morgan State, one of my professors from my social work department calls me while I'm at Ohio State and says, one of Baltimore City's public schools called, saying they're looking for Black social workers, but they say they can't find any qualified Black social workers. And I told them, I got a student getting her master's degree right now at Ohio State. And then we got qualified. So they, on the one hand, I kudos to the school for reaching out to the Black university to recruit. So he called me and he said, call this school, looking for Black. And so I called Woodburn Day School, which was down the street from Morgan, and I was hired to be a clinical social worker in the school. So I was in the school social worker, and I worked it was a school for kids mental and emotional disabilities, and one social worker was assigned to each classroom, and so you have just one classroom of students. So and I was all boys was in the school except for one classroom of girls, and I was assigned to the classroom of girls. So that was the beginning of my career, and I was provider support and programming to these girls navigating so much. And it hit me that I don't know, I realized I was like, I don't know if I can be a clinician for the rest of my life, because I was still doing some of my own healing from my own childhood trauma. And then I realized I was going to have to be a container to hold all of these other folks' pain if I was going to be a therapist. And I said, I think I need to go more macro. And so it was just a year of being a therapist. Well, it's maybe 2 years of being a therapist. I decided to get my PhD. And I decided to focus on research and policy. And so that was my pivot and I also felt like I wanted to help the girls and boys that I was working with at a structural level or at an institutional level. I was like, putting out, dealing with these things one at a time. It just felt like I was going to get depleted, and I also was like, I wanted to make a bigger impact. And so that's what moved me to my PhD. It was hard. It was hard decision with all of the kids I work with, but I think I wanted to have a bigger impact.
Right. And you had to make a
That
decision.
was my beginning of my
Yeah.
That was the beginning of my career. And then I went to University of Maryland, get my PhD in human development, which is an interdisciplinary field that kind of incorporates education, developmental psychology, and sociology. And so we take from all of those areas. And I focused on Black mothering at the time, and became a professor right out. I was a social work professor right out of grad school. So yeah, I have 2 sons in my PhD program, so that was also a unique experience for me. I had my son Kimathi right in my last of my coursework. I actually took my comprehensive exams when he was probably like 4 weeks old, and they gave us a lunch break. His dad brought him to me at my lunch. I nursed him during my lunch break and went back and finished my comprehensive exams.
Oh my goodness.
It's crazy to even think about. And then I had my son Cabral during my dissertation data collection, and I was interviewing mothers, and he wouldn't take a bottle. I was nursing him. So he went with me on my interviews to interview these mothers. And I was like, hey, I'm interviewing Black mothers. I'm a Black mother. We just got to make it work. So Cabral came with me to the vast majority of my interviews for my dissertation. Yeah, it was. But so when I graduated, Kimathi was 3 and Cabral was 1. Yeah.
Wow.
It was a wild time. And and their dad graduated. We graduated. We were in our PhD program together. So he started a year before me, but we graduated on the same day. So we graduated and started our professorships at the same time. So our kids kind of just grew up underfoot in classroom on campus. Yeah.
What a wonderful environment for them that both of you created. So I mean, you've had so many career experiences. I love how I always talk to kids, because young folks get it in their head that whatever they have to do, that's the one thing they're going to do for the rest of their lives. And I love how you described your career as a quilt. You put all these pieces together, and they're all interconnected.
Yeah. And, the data research shows that, people stay in their careers, jobs, an average of 7 years at this point. People are always changing careers and reinventing themselves. And the skills that you get really do transfer, they do So I think that, which is why I'll be honest, I'll put my professor hat here. One of the things about teaching at a small liberal arts school is we actually were our students' academic advisors. And we would always tell our students that it's great to have a liberal arts education and not try to get so specialized in undergrad, because a liberal arts education teaches you how to research, it teaches you critical thinking skills, it teaches you how to write, how to public speak in public, and those things transfer to anything, And so, but sometimes when you get in these kind of narrow fields and you don't quite know what you want to do when you grow up, you might feel a little bit stuck. If you have I always encourage students to choose a major that allows you to go in many directions, So people, and it's hard because you have parents saying, well, what are they going to do with a sociology degree? What are they going to do with this kind of, and I'm like, actually, they can do a lot, because when I'm hiring someone, I need someone who can, no matter what the job is, I'm looking for someone who can write, who can read, who can think critically about the world, who can work well with others. That's not any major. Those are skill sets that you need from any field. And if sometimes I find that the students who haven't had a lot of time thinking critically or haven't had time working collaboratively, they don't thrive in a work environment, because they only want to do that one thing that they were trained on. So I think it's really important that we continue to encourage folks to go into the liberal arts and sciences, and we really counsel parents to back off and trust us, because parents have been some of the worst folks students would come in and say, I really want to do this, but my mom said I gotta, and I'm like, actually, this is your life, this is the beginning of adulthood. But it's hard to say that because the parents are paying the bills often, right?
Right.
And so but I think parents don't realize that the workforce needs a different, doesn't need someone who just does that one thing, who has, that narrow sense. But I'm sorry, I know I digress, but I think
Oh, no.
the
Fine.
question, but I think the question about like the career pivots, it's energizing. I think it helps your brain, it helps you, it's like you can you have to trust that you can figure it out. The last 3 jobs, I have not had any degree in any of those jobs, and guess what, I have figured it out. When I got there, I was like, I know I'm competent, I know I'm a quick, a quick study, and I know I will figure it out. And so, and I know how to ask for help, right? And so those are the skills you need. But I became a social work professor for 7 years, and then the university I was at asked me to be the director of the Women's Studies program, which is an interdisciplinary program. And then I said yes. And when I was there, they said, could you turn it into a major? Because it was just a minor. And so I created a major in women's studies. And then I moved to Chicago, and I moved from social work to women's studies and stayed in women's studies here in Chicago. And then I left higher ed after 18 years and did some policy research, some health policy research. And then I remembered I missed academia, so I went back, but not as a professor. I went back as a director of a campus-based women's center. So it allowed me to be this academic, but in an applied way. So it blended my social work with all of my teaching in women's studies and social work. And I was able to create programming and services and support for the women, faculty, staff, students, and alumni, and community leaders on campus. So I took the social work skills, I took the teaching skills in gender and women's studies, and used that for programming. And that positioned me well to be able to become the chief diversity officer at Northwestern, who I reported to as the Women's Center director. And the chief diversity officer left, and I put on a dress and a cute little bow tie, because I like to have a little masculine energy sometimes when I'm interviewing. And I went to the provost and I said, hey, I'd like to be the chief diversity officer. And it was strategic. I'm not going on record, I don't care. The provost was Black and the chief diversity officer was Black, and they both left Western at the same time, a university that has Black folks underrepresented. And I was like, they in trouble, because they lost a Black provost and a Black chief. So guess who put on her dress and her bow tie, and I went and I said, I'd like to be the next chief diversity officer. I said, it'll make you look good if I, because y'all they're gonna call you racist. Now, they are racist, but I also was just kind of like, I was like, but I'm gonna play, I'm gonna play your game. And so I just literally, told them I wanted the job, and they were like, okay, thank you for stepping up, and so that's how I became the chief diversity officer at Northwestern. so,
Wow.
so I was not going to wait for somebody to ask. I think it's okay for us to be assertive. I think men are assertive all the time. Men ask for what they want. I think it is okay for women to ask for what they want, and what we deserve.
Yes. Morgan State gave you a lot of confidence to get out there.
Yeah, and I like I said, I learn, I observe how they do it, and I'm like, oh, I can do this too. So, and I also, I'll be honest, I do have a commitment to racial equity and gender equity, and and accessibility for people with disabilities, and I was doing that work at the Women's Center, so I saw an opportunity, if I was chief diversity officer, to do it on a larger scale, institutional scale. So I quite honestly, I didn't do anything different that I wasn't already doing at the Women's Center. It just gave me a larger platform, and it allowed me to touch and work at a higher institutional level. So that it didn't feel like a big leap for me. It felt like the work I was already doing, but now I had some, I wouldn't say power, some influence, and being able to move the university in the direction that it just needed to move into, to care for the people I care for on that campus, and last but not least, that positioned me well to then be the chief equity officer for the state of Illinois. And so Governor Pritzker was appointed his first chief equity officer, and actually he called it a chief diversity officer. I changed the name to chief equity officer. And so, yes, I have no problem being assertive. I was like, I don't like the chief diversity because it's just bean counting, like you're getting more bodies, but you're not changing the conditions. And so I said, I don't want diversity in my title anymore. I said, I would like it to be chief equity officer. They were like, okay, so they changed it to my title. But that chief diversity officer role at Northwestern catapulted me into being able to take it on at the state level and to create an office that didn't exist in state government, and is now a national model for how to create these offices in the executive branch of state government. And so I feel really proud of that. It was exhausting, to the last 2 years have been exhausting. So I'm on a sabbatical now. But yeah, I think and I brought my same social work skills, my same women and gender studies skills, my same professor skills into that work. I had an institute for the workers, and we had, training and education. And so I just brought all that stuff into that work too, so I feel like it's the skills you have, research, policy, all of that, the skills, public speaking, writing, that all went with me on all the jobs, Yeah.
That is so good. So one of our listeners mentioned your grandmother and how she talks about all of your accomplishments and is so proud of you. And we know that. We know she is very proud of you. And she also talked about, when you talked about sociology being a gateway for you to get into a lot of different opportunities. Kathy also said psychology is also another example.
Yeah. I think the liberal arts in general, it's broad because you get a broad-based knowledge, and I can say, as someone who's been an administrator in higher ed, some of the professions, they don't even a lot for you to take courses outside of like that profession. But then I'm invited into law schools and medical schools, all in public schools of public health and schools of social work all the time, because to guest lecture, because they're missing that content out of their curriculum. They're missing. And so so what does that mean when students are like, can you come and guest lecture in our class or for the student conference, because we're not getting this in our classes, that critical thinking, that work that focuses on what's going on today in politics, so the direct application of their work. So I find that fascinating that we're 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 focusing just on the clinical, the technical skills, and
Mhm.
the students are saying, actually, you're not preparing us to go out into the real world. And
Right.
they're inviting people like me in to come and offer that kind of almost like, complementary curriculum. Matter of fact, at Northwestern, the undergrads had a 1 week called the class you never got to take.
Oh.
And they invited professors who they really felt like were talking about stuff that they weren't getting talked about in their
Mm.
classes to come and guest lecture. And students on their own were going to classes that they never got to take, which were more progressive, more politically focused. Now, I'm like, when students are having to craft their own curriculum, what does that
Mhm.
mean?
Exactly.
you know and so the class that week was focusing on reproductive justice in particular, and abortion access. And so they were like, we are not getting, no one, our professors are being neutral, they're not talking about, and we need this content knowledge. And
Mhm.
so I lectured every year, for in that, during that week. And the law students, same thing. Can you please come? The medical students, same thing. And this is one of our top universities. And the
Exactly.
students are amazing in the sense that I think that that's what we need. Students who are saying, hey, how do we craft our own educational journeys?
Mm. Yeah. So we have a question here from Kathy. In the political climate that we're in, has it affected your job or the work you do?
Yeah. So I think with regard to the diversity, equity, and inclusion, equity officers, yeah, I think that work has been is the people there's legislation coming after all of that work. It's really sad and disappointing and frustrating. And so, yes, that work is impacted. I have stepped down from the governor's office because I made a I'm really intentional. At this point in my career, I made a 2-year commitment to that work, because I knew that I wanted to return back to my reproductive justice work. And so I just resigned in April. And there's a new person they just hired, my successor. She and I are having a meeting on Friday. I'm excited for her. But yes, I think that she's going to she and my other colleagues around the country in higher ed in particular, are going to have trouble. An example I'll give is the University of Wisconsin, as a state, has just defunded all of the university-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And it's really, scary. And so my daughter is in college there, and she actually is interestingly a peer educator, just like I was. And that was funded through the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. And it was to try to support new students who were coming there, students who were marginalized, and were diverse. And so I'm not sure what's going to happen. So I think it's really scary to see. My work in reproductive justice also, yes, as you know, under attack. So all of the civil rights work that our folks have fought, our parents and grandparents and great grandparents fought for, a lot of that is under attack right now, and that's been a large body of my work. And so I will say that while I am frustrated, I get up and do the work anyway. So, and I'll give you an example. When Donald Trump was elected as president, I knew we were in trouble. The next morning, I got up. I texted my 3 children and apologized to them. I said, adults have failed you, and I'm sorry that we failed you by letting this person come into office. And then I went back to my work. And because my work, it doesn't matter who's in office. We have been fighting, women have been fighting for their bodies, to have access and the rights to their bodies since as long as we remember, right? And so it doesn't matter who's in president, it doesn't matter what your job is. We're always going to be fighting for the rights of our bodies. Same thing with race. Racism is going to exist no matter who's in office. Of course, it's always can be better, right? But I think I am committed to the work, and so I can't let what's happening, impact me. What I can do is try to, of course, resist it and fight against it, but it doesn't, it's always been there. I think it's now we're seeing how horrible, it can be when you have certain people in power. Well, so with electoral and, judicial power. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so true. We just had it. The UNC, the North Carolina system, just passed, their board of governors just passed a resolution or a law or whatever they want to call it, where they can no longer take race, ethnicity, any of that into consideration when hiring.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, it's really unfortunate, and it's ahistorical, and but it's also like, yeah, it's really scary. So my daughter's, so I will say this is why we need to continue to have young people stay engaged, as well as old folks really with them too, because I think there's a lot of times young folks are trying to tell us, and folks don't want to link up with the young folks anymore, and so because they think they're too progressive or too wild. But I really think that it's a time to be intergenerational in all of this work. I'm really flattered. My daughter is wants to go to law school. She's constantly telling me what's going on now and making sure I show up at stuff. And so I appreciate, her partnership and her allyship and her solidarity and her energy to kind of keep this going, because these are generational, battles. And
Yeah.
so we're gonna, our ancestors fought for freedom and they never saw it, right? But they still fought. And so that's the way I think about my work. I might not even see the benefits of what I'm fighting for, but it doesn't mean I don't still show up, right? And it doesn't mean I have to be in front. I can let young people be in front. I can be beside them. I can be behind them, being the wind beneath their wings. And so I don't have to be up front taking up all the space as an older person, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love what you say about letting the young folks lead. I had a conversation with my youngest son after George Floyd was murdered. And at the time, I was expressing concern about him attending the BLM protests and marches in DC.
Yeah.
And I said, you're a 6'4" Black man. You're a target. And he turned and he looked at me. And I thought about when you said you apologized to your kids. He turned and he looked at me. He said, "If your generation had taken care of it, we wouldn't be doing this." And I said, "Wow." And at first, I got a little upset, but then I sat back in it, because one of the things I love is the relationship I have with him and the conversations that we can have. And I
Yeah.
just thought about it and I said, okay, so I know I'm not going to be out there marching. What can I do with whatever I have in
Yeah.
my power to do it?
Yeah.
And that's where I switched over. I've been doing these lives for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And I had just started doing things around talking to career professionals to help students
Yeah.
learn about how people navigate their college and career journeys. And that's when I said, okay, from now on, my focus will be on Black and brown people.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
I think, and it's interesting because I also have an anxiety from raising two Black sons as well. And I remember saying something similar to one of my sons about, well, you're in this Black body and you want to go do this thing. And for him it was something fun. He was hanging out with some white kids and they were doing something. Oh, someone had made it to the state championships for cross country. And when you do that, they TP your house. And so I was like, you are not doing that. Because of course, for me, I'm thinking about the police and what does it mean for him be the only Black kid out there? And so I'm terrified. And I said, you're a Black boy. He said, I know I'm a Black man. I live in this body every day. You don't have to remind me. And he was like, and I also am going to live. And I had to sit with that. So even when this wasn't political for him, he was like, I deserve to have fun. I deserve to
Mhm.
be a knucklehead too. Like I deserve that. And that was really hard for me to sit with, like, yeah, you do deserve to just have fun, right? And because we sometimes prevent our kids from having fun because we want to just keep them safe, right?
Safe.
And so I had to breathe through it. He left and he came. I didn't go to sleep till he got back in, but I had to breathe through it. And I appreciate, him saying
Yeah.
like, I deserve to be a kid, Mom. Like I
Mhm.
deserve, and so sometimes we have to loosen our grip, even though we're terrified, right?
Yes.
And so I think that's, yeah, it's a journey. It's it's a
It
journey,
is.
you
And no
know.
matter and no matter how old they get, we'll still have that because of the world we live in.
Yeah,
because the
yeah, and
world
it's
is moving.
unfortunate that we can't that we even have that vice grip on our kids. It's unfortunate that that's our reality as parents, as Black parents. So our kids deserve to be free, and so they shouldn't have to worry about having fun or walking down the street or sleeping in their bed or going to church or
Mhm.
going for a run. They shouldn't have to worry.
They should
Um,
not.
yeah, yeah. So I
So
think
one
that,
of
you know, I,
oh,
I wanted to make sure I made sure I hit all the questions. I was gonna say that if there's anything else, I'd love to, offer some insights if I have any.
well, one of the things I always like to have as part of these conversations is have the guest recommend a book. And you did recommend one, which I am so glad I had already read and listened to. I was reading it and listening to it on Audible at the same time
Yeah,
because I just get a little crazy. So tell
yeah,
us why what it is about this book that caused you
yeah.
to recommend it.
So since we've been on the call today, I've shared with you all of my journey, right? And every once in a while I've mentioned that um I was navigating a particular home environment that made me also feel like I had to keep going. I had to keep going, right? I had to keep striving and climbing and striving because I couldn't go back home. I've seen a lot of kids cut up in college because they could go back home because they had homes that were safe, right? And loving. And I didn't have that privilege. And so I kept climbing and climbing. So part of what's been my driver, which I haven't talked about today, is that though some of us have a drive that's based on survival, right? And so that has been part of my journey too. And there's an exhaustion that comes with climbing and striving and accomplishing, and so the where I am now, and I think a lot of women get in their 50s and they're just kind of like after they've raised their kids, and I've gotten to a point where I'm just like, you know what? I deserve stillness right now. I deserve rest. And I don't know how to do it, but I deserve it. And
Yeah.
so I resigned from the governor's office in April. And for the first time, I'm resting. I'm not working right now. I'm taking a sabbatical. I'm traveling. I was in Mexico for a month. I'm here in Austin right now visiting my niece and my new grandnephew, something I normally wouldn't, be as spontaneous to
Mhm.
do. I've driven up to see my daughter and hang out with her, and she's up in Madison. I'm going to Bogota, Colombia next week, and I'm resting and centering my own, my own healing and my own whims for the first time. Not focusing on so much on my career, not focusing so much on even my family. I'm focusing on me, and so rest as resistance comes at a critical point in my career journey, where I'm choosing stillness and choosing joy and just kind of frolicking. I've been calling it my summer of Sekile, and the family stuff's still going on. I got three emerging children. So, what I call three emerging adults. I call them emerging adults. So I've got three emerging adults that I'm still parenting every day, and
Yeah.
there's something popping off every 5 seconds with these three. But I'm booking my tickets. I'm laying in my hammock. I'm doing yoga at the beach. I'm, watering my plants, and I'm just resting in the midst of it all. And so I'm prioritizing because I think sometimes we forget about ourselves.
That's
We forget. And I think, and I've noticed that I'm not alone, particularly career oriented women. There's just this drive we have, and we're not caring for ourselves, our bodies, our spirits, and so that's where I am at this point in my career, and I'm very unapologetic about it. So my kids are like, well, you didn't even invited us. I'm like, no, I did not. They're just kind of like, Zora was like, well, I'm home. You're going to Bogota. She's like, I'll be, and I was like, I know you're home because she's home from
right.
college. She's
Right.
she's you know she's a rising junior, and I'm like, I know you can take care of the cats and water my plants.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
And so, they're just like, who is this? Who is this mama? What, and
I
I'm like,
know.
this is a new version of me. Nice to meet you. So,
I love it. I love it. And
yeah,
as
so that's where that book recommendation comes from, because in the midst of all the climbing and stuff that I just named, we have to take care of ourselves, and I say that broadly because some people hear that and they think just exercise or just
mm,
therapy or just, it's going to be different from each person, but for me it's massages, it's therapy, it's travel, um it's gentle, embodied movement, and so and so I think it's different, but it's just a note, I guess a bookend to today's discussion to say, and guess what, you gotta care for yourself in the midst of all this, because while all that was going on, there were times when I wasn't caring for myself, you know. I got so consumed with everything, I forgot to care for myself, or I didn't know how, or and so I don't want that for anyone listening to this call. And so I would say start with that book, you know, and
right.
yeah.
And for people, again, this is the name of the book. And you can look, guys, if you don't want to buy the book, and if you do buy it, please buy it from Mahogany Books. It's a Black-owned bookstore in Washington, D.C. Get it from your public library.
Yeah, I got the audio one from my public library. Yeah.
Yes. Again, you started the conversation talking about a lot of public institutions. Your public library is one of those public
Yes, thank you
institutions
for that. And
that
my
we
first
need.
job was at the public library, the library downtown in Providence. Me
Okay.
and the main library downtown. Me and my
Downtown.
friends used to walk after school, and we were all assigned to different parts of the library. So that was one of my first jobs. Yeah.
And they
So,
have just renovated that library, and it
oh,
is,
nice. I
yes.
was so bummed. I got stuck in the government document section. I was like,
Oh,
of all the sections of the library. So I guess it paid off in the end.
yes.
So, yeah.
Sekile, this has been fascinating. This has been so good. And I think for folks that are listening in now and folks who are going to listen to this on the replay, you had so much wisdom
Oh,
for
thank you.
women, for humanity, for people, for parents who are pushing their college-bound students. It was a joy to listen to. I learned new things, and I'm always willing to learn new things and hear new things. So I certainly appreciate all of that. Before I just want to make sure people know, because we just said a little bit about your two books, and I just want to make sure that people see these books. So I'm just going to go here on solo screen for a minute. So this is Sekile's first book that she edited, Laboring Positions, Black Women Mothering and the Academy. So that is book one. And then her second book is Lean Semesters, How Higher Education Reproduces Inequity. Now, the reason I'm showing you these books is because I would love, love, love for folks to win a copy of one of these books. And if you'd like to be entered into the drawing, what you have to put in the comments, you have to put hashtag justice. And I chose the word justice because all of Sekile's work is around justice. So if you're interested in a copy of the book, make sure I'm waiting to see people put those in there, put hashtag justice in the comment section. As soon as we get at least two people that do that, we will go ahead and do the drawing. But I can't do it if you don't participate. So we've got one. So let's go. Come on. I need at least one more, maybe two more, because we've got three people watching. Um, those of you that are watching this on the replay, unfortunately, the drawing is going to be live. So you won't be able to take part in the drawing, but you can certainly go and to your public library and take out the book, or you can just go ahead and purchase a book. So I'm going to go ahead and do the drawing because we do have two entries. Any other entries out there? Going. Okay, going to do the drawing and see and the people whoever wins, you get to choose which of the two books you would like to have. Here we go. Kathy
Oh,
Brown,
oh,
you are the winner. So, Kathy, you can
Kathy,
just let,
if our
hey.
paths if our paths cross, Kathy, I will be sure to autograph that for you.
Oh, that's even better. So, congratulations, Kathy. So, Kathy, let me know which of the two books that you would like to have, and I will make sure that you get a copy of the book. Again, Sekile, thank you so much. I think
Thank you too.
this was one of those conversations that couldn't be scripted. Um, because you just have had such a rich college and career journey. And what I love again is how you were able to show how a liberal arts education at an HBCU has taken you to all corners of the work world.
Thank
So,
you. And I
and
and I talked about those public institutions, but I do want to give a shout out to my family because I had a wonderful babysitter who has not fully introduced herself. And that would be Dr. B, was one of my wonderful babysitters when I was a kid. And so
oh,
thank you for being one of those warm, safe spaces in my life.
oh, you are so welcome. And thank you for that shout out.
Thank
So,
you.
everyone, again, thank you for being here. Those of you that had the opportunity to watch, please make sure you share this out with your community, with your people, because again, this is a valuable conversation for everyone. Okay, so Kathy has decided that she wants laboring positions, so we will make sure you get that one, Kathy. So again, folks, make sure you share this out. And I will be back next Monday. It'll just be me, it won't be a guest. I shouldn't say just me. It will be me talking
Yeah,
about some college knowledge for folks. But I'm always looking for Black and Brown career professionals. So if you know of someone, shoot me a quick email at drb@stepstothefuture.com so I can reach out to that person and see if they're interested. So again, thank you everyone so much for being here today, this evening, for sharing it out. I really appreciate all of your support. I appreciate you taking the time to come and listen to us. And thank you, Kathy. You're welcome. We really appreciate it. Um, Sekile, stay on. So, folks, I will see you next Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Take care.
take care. Thank you, everybody.